Hi everyone, this is Robin with Weight Loss Apocalypse, and I am wanting to talk about leptin resistance. One of the things that when I was doing all of my research and trying to really figure out why HCG was preventing, all of the symptoms of starvation, except for nutritional stuff, but hormonal symptoms of starvation, is I often came to the earlier research, and then it went into, research that was trying to figure out, obviously with less leptin what's going on, with too much leptin what's going on, and as they realize that more leptin isn't better, less leptin isn't better, but there's an ideal range, there was this conversation that started in the science about, well, if with more leptin we should see more of the hormonal response from the organs, and as they discovered that wasn't the case, that the more leptin you had, there came a point where it looked like the organ that was responding to leptin didn't function with the same kind of linear growth pattern, that as leptin levels went up, that the other organ's response eventually went down like this. And which makes sense. I actually wrote a blog on this. I don't know if you guys have read or seen my blog. It's weightlossapocalypse.blogspot.com, and I talk about this concept. And where I believe the scientists have gone wrong. Now, trust me, this is just my opinion. Based on what I've observed with the HCG protocol. They believe that because you're producing, the more fat you have, the exponentially higher amounts of leptin your fat releases with a stimulus, that you somehow must be consuming such an astronomically high amount of food to be obese. And because they're kind of taking this whole concept of calories and trying to apply it to the idea of hormones. And it actually doesn't line up, because I've witnessed thousands of people who are morbidly obese who are not hungry. In fact, I've yet to find someone who's morbidly obese who is insatiable all the time. And however, let me rephrase this. The more fat you have, the less hunger you experience, and it's less often. However, when you get hungry, it's pretty quick. So it becomes and I believe that has more to do with blood glucose and how quickly your blood glucose is diminishing than it does the fact that your leptin levels are resistant. Okay, so if you're hungry, that's a sign that your hypothalamic leptin levels are low, not excessively high. Are you with me? And there, again, the idea behind leptin resistance is that the more leptin you have, the less it works. Thus, you must be hungry all the time and binging all the time and gorging, because that's the only way to gain fat, which is not correct. So they're taking outdated information and old science and trying to continue to keep it applicable with this new science. And so, for example, if you actually listened to your hunger, you would note that your need for food is substantially lower than you thought. And if you prevent severe hunger, you'll find that you still don't like to binge. In my opinion, I believe the binge process is 99.9% psychological, and much of it has to do with guilt. It has nothing to do with this kind of addiction, I can't control myself. It has much more to do with guilt than anything. And the process begins with judging food. So if you're on this diet and you know you're fat and you need to lose weight and you feel like a failure and you're following, and there's all this bad food you have to avoid, all of a sudden you're thinking about it all the time because you got to avoid the food. Then you're getting hungry because you're not eating. You're trying to control your food intake. So you get too hungry, you start to eat, and your body, and then you start feeling guilty because you're eating, and then you're judging the food that you're eating, so there's even more guilt, and eventually you say screw it. You might as well eat everything because you ruined everything in the first place. So you might as well just start over tomorrow. And so you end up forcing yourself to consume food you don't even want to compensate for the famine you're going to have tomorrow. I know I've repeated this in other videos. That has more to do with a binge than leptin. You got to trust me on this. And if you were to finitely control with your hunger, your likelihood of having leptin resistance is minimal, even with the excessive fat. It just requires that you're very aware of how hunger goes away, and it's that takes so much practice. And to me, that's why the protocol is so valuable, because it allows you to really get in tune to that with the environment. It's like looking under a microscope. And so I know I'm rambling, but leptin resistance, absolutely, it exists, and it exists within the organ system of the body. Where I don't believe it exists is in your hunger and in the fat cells themselves, because fat cells can acclimate, fat cells can multiply and grow, and that's why leptin levels are exponentially higher. That's why the more fat cells you have, the more leptin you get. If they were resistant, then eventually fat cells wouldn't work and you wouldn't get release of fuel and there would be no type 2 diabetes and blah, 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 blah. So yeah, leptin resistance occurs within the organ system of the body. And it may be because, you know, as your fat cells multiply and you have more and more leptin, your other organs don't grow and multiply cells, and they can't acclimate. They can't grow at the rate that your fat is growing. Like the thyroid can't get bigger. It can't have more output than it does. And so there comes a point where your leptin levels no longer can create an equal and opposite reaction from the thyroid. That's resistance. So, all right, I'm going to end this because this is way too long and it's just me rambling. But yeah, leptin resistance, that we just need so much more research. And I believe that the more scientists actually see something as miraculous as the HCG protocol, that you can control this environment even though you have all of this fat and you don't have type 2 diabetes, even with all of this fat that is very behavioral. And if you control the behavior and the hormonal stimulus of food, that all of those diseases and all of those problems associated to leptin resistance, such as breathing, sleeping problems, sleep apnea, breathing, asthma, skin issues, psoriasis. I mean, go research whatever ailment you have. Go search engine leptin and whatever ailment, and I almost guarantee there's a link between the two. So if you just stop stimulating that leptin with food, your likelihood of having that resistance or issue in the endocrine system is going to diminish in right away. So you don't have to be on the protocol to figure this out. You don't have to do the protocol to get this healing. It just requires that you have the incredible desire to stop eating without hunger, and that you're also preventing massive hunger. You need to be prepared, and you need to take care of your body just like you do a child. You would never not pack snacks for a child, ever. And you would never allow a child to go as hungry as you let yourself. And you would never tell a child that they suck and they screwed everything up so they might as well binge. You would never do that. Nor would you take a child and weigh them on a daily basis 5 or 6 times a day. And if they don't lose weight, you would never ever tell them that they're failures and it's not working so they might as well go binge. You really need to step outside of your own head and start loving yourself like you would a child. It is that simple. It's that simple. So there's my 2 cents for today. I love y'all.